Okay, this is a big one. 60 frames per second have become the gold standard in video games, even more so than a high resolution it seems. The days when this topic only seemed to attract PC gamers are long gone. More and more games on consoles implement different modes now that let you prioritize a smooth frame rate. But why is that? Is 60 FPS really always better than 30? Is it more important than resolution and graphical fidelity? The answer might be a bit more complex than you think. Stick around to find out, and if you're able, make sure to watch this video at 60 FPS as well to get the full experience. Okay then, let's do this. And as always, welcome to Framedropped. What might sound surprising is that higher frame rates in video games aren't a modern thing. The PlayStation 1, for example, had over 100 games released on the platform that were running in 60 FPS or at least some kind of high frame rate mode. On the PlayStation 2, 60 FPS even seemed to be the rule rather than the exception. But what has changed? Let's take a look at the Ratchet & Clank games, one of my favorite franchises of all time. They targeted 60 FPS in all of their main PS2 and PS3 releases, though the PS3 titles often struggled to maintain that. An Insomniac developer stated that A Crack in Time was probably going to be the last 60 FPS Ratchet game. The PS4 remake then was only running at 30 frames before it got patched for the next generation of consoles, and the duo's first true PS5 game lets you decide between a 30 FPS mode with higher graphical settings or a performance mode that again targets a smooth 60. But everything shown about the game until the making of this video has been released in the lower of the two framerate modes. Seems a little odd if you think about it, doesn't it? If a high frame rate is so important to gamers, and if it's by no means anything new, why do developers still release games with a lower frame rate? In 2018, Heather Alexandra, a journalist at the gaming website Kotaku, claimed that a case could be made for having some games run at 24 frames per second, and the overwhelming majority strongly disagreed with her opinion in the comments. But why is that statement so divisive? Why has 60 FPS, 30 FPS or any frame rate for that matter been established as a standard? And yes, the eye only needs about 14 to 16 frames a second to perceive motion, and no, the human eye can not only see 30 FPS. The threshold at which you don't see any difference anymore depends on the person, and you can train your eyes. According to studies, Air Force pilots have been said to detect single images at about 220 frames per second. Without jumping headfirst into a big pool of dry history lessons, the simple reason why 30 frames per second, so 30p or 60i, have been established as a standard in North America is because of the electricity output. The power line frequency in the US is also 60 Hz, which again doesn't have a significant technical reason. That's it, simply because of convenience. In Europe, the power line frequency is 50 Hz. For that same reason, PAL games, so games for the European market, used to be 25 or 50 FPS respectively. Some retro NTSC games are more sought after for that reason, because some games developed mainly for the US market were simply transcoded to the EU framerate without putting too much conversion work into it. As a matter of fact, TV programs are still aired in 30p or 60i in the US and in 25p or 50i in Europe. With the advent of smartphones, smart TVs, smart fridges, smart grandmas...
Hey, Google!
Okay, just kidding. Nobody has a smart fridge. Those norms are becoming less and less important. But if we want to talk about what might be cinematic or not, we do have to talk about the visual art form, film. The standard frame rate in film has been 24 frames per second since about the late 1920s. Why that specific number? Again, an almost random coincidence that was a compromise among the usual silent film frame rates that were really all over the place. We'll get to more parallels to film in a bit, but if I don't say anything controversial every 5 minutes, I get an allergic reaction. So first, let me tell you what I personally think about that topic.
Why don't you put that on your Good Morning Missouri fucking wake up broadcast, bitch?
And risk that you tune off. Because I probably have a weird take on that. I prefer 60 FPS with some games. And with other games, I kinda prefer 30, and I'll try to tell you why. So, in my opinion, every game that requires a fast input or is competitive is definitely best in 60 FPS or higher, no questions asked. Examples are most online shooters, racing and fighting games. I simply cannot play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 Remake in local split-screen mode because it is 30 FPS and just doesn't feel right. The PS5 and Series X versions even have a 120 FPS mode that is smooth as fuck and just a joy to play. If you have a screen that supports it, that is. Neo felt unplayable at 30 FPS, although the game sometimes looks like, what is the scientific term? Oh yeah, like crap in 60p on a base PS4. Fighting games are usually at least 60 FPS on consoles because they sometimes require very accurate button presses, and more frames don't only mean a smoother picture, but less input lag, and for those competitive games that is paramount. Dragon Ball FighterZ, for example, runs in 60 frames per second, although all of the action on the screen is animated with less frames, so it looks like the anime, and that works great. Some games, such as Yakuza Like a Dragon, visibly struggle with the lower framerate modes on consoles. For example, even the button prompts on the karaoke minigame are blurry and therefore harder to read. So the version with more frames is the superior version here. And by the way, I can highly recommend these videos by the talented folks at Digital Foundry if you are into in-depth tech analyses. But sometimes the higher frame rates seems a little off, at least to my eyes. Such as when you are in the overworld in Cuphead, a beautiful game that, similar to Dragon Ball FighterZ, aims to mimic a cartoon art style. Because the camera seems a little bit too smooth? As with the new patch that doubles the frame rate of the Ratchet & Clank remake. Is that just because I'm used to something else? I would really be interested if some of you guys feel the same way about some games, but would less frames really make that better? Let's assume that there really is a case to be made about lower frame rates appearing more cinematic. Do some developers really lower the frame rate on purpose to make the game feel more like a film? According to Ready at Dawn, the developer behind the story-based steampunk-inspired game The Order 1886, they do. In a 2014 interview with Kotaku, they stated, "We're going for this filmic look. So one thing that we knew immediately was films run at 24 FPS. We're gonna run at 30 because 24 FPS does not feel good to play." So there's one concession in terms of making it aesthetically pleasing, because it just has to feel good to play. If you push that to 60 and you have it look the way we do, it actually would end up looking like something on the Discovery Channel, like an HDTV kind of segment or a sci-fi original movie maybe, which doesn't quite have the kind of look and texture that we want from a movie. So, is this really true? Do some developers prefer 30 FPS even if they technically could make the game run higher? In this case, maybe. But in most cases, rather unlikely. If they could make the game run with more frames and keep the graphical fidelity, they most likely would. I for once thought that The Last of Us looked perfect in 30 FPS on the PS3. Certainly, this was the way it was meant to be played, because it was more cinematic. Naughty Dog would have never made it run smoother just because they could. And then I saw this part in the making of.
Yeah, we put the 30 frames per second goal because that's what we shoot for. Someone nicely put the 60 frames per second goal. It's like, yeah, we're not going to hit that.
I was wrong, and I admit it. If any game truly wanted to mimic film, It would need to run in 24 frames per second, have the exact amount of shutter speed and motion blur that film cameras have, and would need to have many more parts that all make up the infamous film look. Just Google film look and see how many young filmmakers are trying to find a formula for that. Simply lowering the frame rate won't cut it. But a high frame rate does look more realistic, so in a way less cinematic. A long time ago, when dinosaurs still roamed the earth and I was a film student, the first Hobbit film was released in 2012. What makes this release special is that it was the first high-budget film that you could view in high frame rates, 48 frames per second to be exact, in selected cinemas. The critical response to that was lukewarm at best. Many people, including most of my colleagues, didn't like the look, and many critics referenced the famous soap opera effect, in which everything looks cheap and less cinematic. The answer as to why film and games seem to go in such opposite directions on that topic might be quite simple. We like what we are used to. We are used to seeing 24 FPS on the silver screen, and any significant deviation from that number just doesn't seem quite right for a lot of people. The same can be said about games. 60 FPS has been around for a long time, and although some of us still play 30 FPS games, we are used to both standards. And because one looks smoother than the other, many simply seem to prefer that. So we like our movies to be stylized and our games to be realistic, so as close to real life as possible. Of course, as with every rule, there are exceptions. I once knew someone who couldn't stand going to the cinema because the movies were choppy in their opinion. This was also someone who preferred the motion smoothing function on the TV to be turned on. This person still haunts me in my dreams.
To that end, we'd like a moment of your time to talk to you about video interpolation.
So in conclusion, once and for all, is it just a vocal minority that demands high frame rates? Do most gamers not care? No, that's not it. But most casual gamers, the ones that probably won't watch this video, don't really notice a difference in frame rate as much. You would be surprised how many people without a trained eye seem to miss the most obvious of things in films as well. However, what those casual gamers, who are the vast majority, do notice are graphics. Remember the Insomniac developer who said that they won't concentrate on high frame rates anymore? They said that because they did some research and found that higher frame rates do not significantly affect the sales of a game, and also do not significantly affect the reviews of a game. Graphics, however, affect both. No matter how powerful the hardware is, you could always tune down the frame rate and get better graphics, or vice versa. How do you get people who don't play games as often or don't know a lot about gaming in general to buy a shiny new console or a game? You probably try to reach them through TV and cinema commercials that don't even run in 60 FPS, or through news articles that mostly only have still pictures, or online videos that are highly compressed. In all these instances, graphics would matter significantly more than a high frame rate. And this is probably why games like the new Ratchet & Clank and Spider-Man Miles Morales almost only show 30 FPS gameplay and pre-release material. Although you have the option of playing it in 60 FPS when you buy the game. But in my opinion, this is already the best thing to do. Apart from PC gaming, where customization has always been key, let the player decide. Build in a graphics and a framerate mode and make it so the user can switch anytime. And this is what most games are already doing. For marketing purposes, it really makes sense to put the focus on graphical fidelity. When graphics truly become photorealistic, and that might still take a little while, high frame rates and other things might become even more important, because the user always needs new flashy technical terms to be excited about new products, such as with modern TVs and even phones that have a higher resolution than most cinema screens. But maybe that should be a topic for another video. What do you think? Do you always prefer a higher frame rate, or does it depend on the game? Do you think developers are already steering in the right direction? I'd love to discuss that in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If not, tell me what you didn't like so I can improve my future content. Thank you for watching and see you next time.